They came from the dark between stars. Vast ships like obsidian spears, their hulls etched with veins of crimson light. The Invarian Empire did not expand with words or treaties. It consumed. Worlds did not surrender. They were extinguished. 50. Star systems had already fallen. Each conquest followed the same pattern, as inevitable as the turning of a tide. The fleet would arrive without warning, a wall of ships blotting out the heavens. Orbital bombardments would follow, precise and merciless, collapsing cities into firestorms before defenders could muster a reply. Then came the descent, troop, carriers like iron locusts darkening the skies, disgorging soldiers who moved as one. The Invarians were a people without hesitation, without dissent, a hive bound by a single will. Their admirals did not debate strategy. They executed it with clinical efficiency, each campaign another line in an endless march. For 3 centuries, no power had stopped them. To the galaxy, they were not conquerors. They were inevitability. At the tip of the spear was Admiral Zexalon. His name was whispered among survivors, as one might whisper the name of a storm. Tall, even for his kind, clad in black armor that shimmered faintly with red currents, Zexalon embodied the Invarian doctrine. Cold logic, absolute certainty, and the patience of a predator that already knows the kill is inevitable. His fleets never faltered. His victories were never in doubt, and now his eyes had turned to Terrius IV. From orbit, Terrius was a world of green seas and amber deserts, its cities strung like jewels along river valleys. Its people, the Terraians, were no warriors. Their ships were merchant craft, their weapons ceremonial. When the first shadows of the Invarian Armada eclipsed their skies, panic broke like glass. Sirens howled in cities that had never known war. Families fled into the deserts, into the forests, anywhere but home. But there was nowhere to run. Zexalon observed from his flagship, the Blood Spire. His voice carried through the fleet's commnet, calm as a surgeon preparing an incision. Target population centers. Silence resistance before it forms. Assimilation begins at dawn. The bombardment began. Fire rained from the heavens. Glass towers collapsed in waves of dust and ash. The oceans boiled where plasma strikes pierced the atmosphere. Within hours, half the planet's cities were craters, their populations vaporized. The survivors screamed into their comms for mercy, for negotiations, for anything. But the Invarians had no word for mercy. On the ground, black-armored legions marched through the ruins. They moved with the eerie precision of machines, their eyes glowing faintly red through helmets that concealed every trace of individuality. They dragged survivors into processing camps, where the choice was simple: subjugation or execution. To the Invarians, this was not cruelty. It was order. A new world added to the harmony of their empire. To the Terraians, it was annihilation, but not every voice went silent. Far above the carnage, hidden in the debris field of an old asteroid mine, a small scout vessel watched with trembling, hands gripping its controls. The Aurora, a human exploration ship, had been charting nearby systems when it stumbled upon the invasion. Its captain, Lisa Reeves, stared in horror at the unfolding destruction. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet her crew recorded everything: the orbital bombardments, the troop deployments, the crimson banners unfurling across a burning sky. For humanity, the Invarians had always been a distant rumor, a name whispered in border colonies about wars that seemed far away. Reeves understood in that moment the rumor was real, and the fire was coming. She ordered the Aurora to break stealth long enough to send a signal, a desperate transmission laced with static across the void. "This is Captain Reeves of the Aurora," Invarian fleet confirmed. "They've taken Terrius IV. They're coming." The signal cut off as Invarian interceptors swept the skies. Reeves slammed the Aurora into a blind jump, its engines screaming. They escaped, barely. The message was already on its way home. Zexalon, in his cold silence, had noticed. His eyes traced the trail of the fleeing human vessel. He did not give chase. One ship was beneath his concern. But still, he watched the stars where it had vanished, the faintest ripple in his otherwise flawless conquest. Humans, he murmured, tasting the word as though it were unfamiliar prey. His advisors dismissed them as primitives, an upstart species confined to a single cluster of worlds, insignificant, soft, not worth the Empire's attention. Zexalon did not agree. He had studied the ancient records, the whispers of how humanity had resisted other powers in ages past. Not with strength, but with something else. Something dangerous. "Prepare the next campaign," he said at last. "But watch the Terran worlds. Their time will come." Meanwhile, on Earth, Reeves's message shattered the illusion of peace. In the Grand Chamber of the United Security Council, delegates listened in silence as her transmission played again and again, the images of burning cities reflected in their eyes. Some denied it, some raged, some demanded immediate surrender, insisting that humanity could not stand against an empire that had crushed 50 systems without effort. But others felt a spark. Fear? Yes. But also defiance. Humanity had always been cornered. Always fought with its back to the wall, and sometimes, impossibly, it had survived. From that chaos of voices, a plan emerged. One ship, still under construction, was brought to the table, the USS Defender, a warship unlike any Earth had ever built. Experimental weapons, reinforced hulls, stealth systems designed to confuse enemy sensors. It was not enough to defeat an empire. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was enough to resist, and resistance was all they had. Back in orbit over Tarius IV, the fires still burned. Invarian banners rose above the ruins. The people of Tarius were broken, their songs silenced, their histories erased. In their place, the Empire carved another mark into its ledger of conquest. For the galaxy, it was just another world lost. But for humanity, it was the first warning shot of a war that would define an age. And somewhere in the stars, the Aurora raced home carrying with it the truth. The Invarian Empire was coming, and Earth had only one choice: to prepare or to perish. The message from the Aurora spread like wildfire. On Earth, it did not arrive as a whisper but as a thunderclap, echoing across the great halls of the United Security Council. The transmission, the flames consuming Tarius IV, the Invarian banners, sweeping across the colony, played on towering screens before the Chamber of Delegates. Hardened men and women, veterans of politics and war alike, sat in a silence broken only by the crackle of destruction in the recording. No one could deny it now. The Invarian Empire was real, and it was coming. For centuries, Earth had debated whispers of alien civilizations, rumors from deep space scouts, unverified sensor ghosts, fleeting contacts lost in the dark. But the footage from the Aurora left no room for doubt. The Invarians were not rumor. They were empire. 50 systems had already fallen, 50 worlds bent to their will, and now their shadow reached the cradle of humanity itself. The council chamber became a crucible. Words clashed like blades, sharpened by fear. "Survival is the only path," cried Minister Vera of the Martian Union, her voice ringing above the clamor. "We must negotiate. We must submit if we are to endure. The Invarians have crushed every world before us. To resist is to invite annihilation." Her counterpart from Europa slammed a fist against the table. "Submit? Do you not see? Tarius IV was no battlefield. It was an execution. They leave no survivors, no culture, no memory. To kneel is to die slowly. To fight is to die standing." The chamber erupted. Some demanded diplomacy, clinging to the fantasy that words might soften the grip of an empire that spoke only through fire. Others shouted for arms, desperate to awaken the old shipyards buried in lunar craters, to break the seals on weapons long outlawed. The room became a storm of voices, each one louder, angrier, more desperate than the last. And then the storm broke. Admiral Kalen Holt rose. The chamber fell into silence. Holt was not a politician. He was a soldier of Earth's void fleets, a relic of a quieter age when humanity still thought it had time. He stood like iron, his face carved by years of command, his eyes lit with the fire of men who had seen too much and lost too much. "The debate is finished," Holt said quietly. Yet in the silence, his voice carried farther than the shouting ever had. "The Invarians do not negotiate. They do not bargain. They consume." His gaze swept across the council, pinning them to their seats. "We have one choice. Prepare. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. If we do not meet them in the void, then we will meet them here. Over the ashes of Earth." The words landed like stone. Even those who hated him could not deny them, and so the council, fractured and divided, did what humans have always done in the face of annihilation. They argued. They compromised. They voted. The result was far from unity, but it was a spark. The order was given. Every fleet dock, every orbital yard, every hidden arsenal buried in the scars of old wars was to be reawakened. Colonies pledged their resources, reluctantly, fearfully, but they pledged. Civilian liners were converted into gunships. Mining craft were retrofitted with cannons. Old frigates left to rust in the Oort clouds were dragged back into service. And in the center of it all stood one ship, the spear point of a scattered defense. The USS Defender. She was humanity's pride, a warship unlike any built before, forged in secret from alloys mined in the belt and powered by engines tested only in silence. Her hull bristled with experimental weapons, rail lances, gravitic disruptors, a new shield array designed to bend reality itself around her frame. She was more than a ship. She was a gamble, and at her helm was the man who had volunteered for the impossible. Commander Eric Wells. He was no Holt, no Iron Legend. He was young for command, barely 40, his career marked not by victories but by stubbornness. He was the officer who had argued against protocol, who had risked everything to save civilian lives when orders told him to stand down. He was the one who refused to accept inevitability, and it was that defiance that made him the Council's reluctant choice. For in the war to come, humanity did not need obedience. It needed someone who would do the unthinkable. Wells stood in the Defender's command chamber, watching the bustle of engineers, technicians, and crew. Men and women who knew the odds. Men and women who would sail into the jaws of an empire. He thought of Terrius IV, of the flames, of the silence. His hand tightened into a fist. "If they want Earth," he whispered, "they'll bleed for every step they take." The words were quiet, but on that deck they spread like fire. Yet even as Earth scrambled, even as hope flickered, the shadow across the stars deepened. Admiral Zexalon of the Anvarian fleet reviewed the reports from Terrius IV. With cold disdain, resistance had been minimal. The colony's defenses shattered like glass. The assimilation was complete. But one thing lingered in his mind. A human scout vessel, the Aurora. It had escaped. That meant Earth knew. Zexalon's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or hunger. "Let them prepare," he hissed to his second. "Let them gather their fleets, their toys, their fragile hopes. It changes nothing. The Invarian tide cannot be stopped. We will break them, as we have broken all before." The stars reflected in his eyes like fire. Their homeworld will burn. And so the stage was set. On Earth, fragile alliances formed under the shadow of fear. Old rivalries were buried beneath a single truth: survival. The Defender prepared to sail, its crew carrying not just weapons but the burden of every soul who called humanity their own. And across the void, the Invarian stirred. An empire of 50 worlds turned its gaze upon one blue planet, daring to resist where none had before. The war had not yet begun, but its echo was already written in the stars. The void around Arcturus was silent, too silent. The USS Defender drifted among the fractured remains of an asteroid belt, her engines muted, her silhouette hidden against the jagged rocks. The crew moved like whispers through the command chamber. their voices subdued as though sound itself might betray them. Commander Eric Wells stood at the center, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Dots flickered across the holographic sphere, faint energy signatures at the edge of detection. The Invarians were coming. He could feel it. "Contact range in 7 minutes," murmured Lieutenant Ramos, her hands trembling slightly on the console. She was young. Most of them were. The Defender had been staffed with the best, but experience against an empire like this? None. Only simulations. Only guesses. Wells didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence of his presence was enough. The crew remembered the Council's orders. The Defender was not meant to fight. Not yet. Their mission was reconnaissance. Observe the Invarian fleet, learn its tactics, report back to Earth. But as the sensor feed sharpened, as more and more crimson markers appeared across the display, it became clear what they were about to witness. Not maneuvers, not patrols. An invasion. The first ship emerged from the void like a blade drawn from a sheath. Its hull shimmered in sickly metallic hues, alive with crawling patterns of energy. Behind it came another, and another, until the black was filled. With them, sleek insectile warships gliding in formation, their movements too precise to be coincidence. The Invarians were not simply traveling, they were hunting. Wells clenched his jaw. He thought of Terrius IV, of cities collapsing in fire, of screams swallowed by silence, and he knew what those ships meant for Arcturus. On the planet below, hundreds of thousands of civilians lived their ordinary lives, unaware of the shadow now descending upon them. The Council's orders rang in his mind. Do not engage. Stay hidden. Survive. But his heart rebelled. The Invarian fleet spread like wings around the planet. Orbital defenses activated, old satellites, a scattering of outdated gun platforms. But they were nothing. The first wave of plasma fire cut through them. As if they were paper, Arcturus's skies lit with falling debris. The colonists didn't even have time to evacuate. Wells could see it all on his screen, the flames beginning to bloom, the comm channels filling with desperate calls for help. And then came the sound. Not real sound, but the compressed, distorted screams of civilians flooding through emergency bands. Families pleading for someone, anyone, to answer. His crew looked at him, waiting. Their orders were clear, but their eyes asked a different question. Are we going to just watch? Wells's decision came in a heartbeat. Helm, he said, voice steady. Bring us out of cover, weapons online. The silence on the deck shattered into a storm. Commander, the Council's orders. I don't give a damn about the Council. Wells snapped. His voice echoed like thunder. Those are our people down there. We don't watch them burn. For a moment, time froze. Then, the crew obeyed. The Defender came alive. Engines roared, hull plating shifted, power surged into weapons arrays. The great ship pulled free from the asteroid belt and surged toward the enemy like a predator breaking cover. The Invarians saw them instantly. To them, the Defender must have seemed insignificant, a single vessel daring to challenge the swarm. Their warships adjusted course with mechanical precision, dozens of crimson markers converging on the lone human ship. But Wells had not chosen to hide in the asteroids by accident. Fire all rail lances, he ordered. The rocks around the Defender lit with sudden fire as magnetic accelerators hurled spears of tungsten into the void. The asteroids themselves became shrapnel fields, fragments of stone and metal scattering into the paths of the Invarian ships. The first enemy cruiser shuddered as a rail round punched clean through its hull, venting green fire into space. Another veered too late and slammed into the debris cloud, tearing itself apart. For the first time in centuries, Invarian warships were bleeding. The crew of the Defender erupted with something that felt like shock, like disbelief, like hope. We hit them, Ramos shouted. We actually hit them. Wells's voice cut sharp across the euphoria. We're not done yet, focus. The Defender twisted through the asteroid belt, engines flaring as she danced among the rocks. Plasma bolts carved the space behind her, missing by meters, detonating asteroids into dust. Shields rippled, struggling against the sheer heat of enemy fire. But the Defender kept moving. She struck again, and again. Every shot, every maneuver, was a message. Humanity would not kneel. The battle raged for minutes that felt like lifetimes. The Defender was only one ship, but she fought like a fleet, her weapons singing, her crew refusing to break. And then, miracle of miracles, the colony transports began to rise from Arcturus. Freighters, shuttles, anything with engines. The civilians had seen the fight above, seen the impossible sight of a human ship standing against the tide, and they fled, seizing their chance, racing toward the stars. Wells saw them on his display, tiny blips of life struggling for survival. His chest tightened. They had bought them time, but victory was never the goal. The Defender was bleeding. Hull. Breaches tore across her flanks. Shield integrity dropped below 30%. Half the rail cannons were gone, and the Invarians were learning. Their formations tightened. Their fire grew more precise. One by one, the asteroids around the Defender were vaporized, her cover stripped away. This was not a battle they could win. It was a message. A spark. Wells set his jaw. Signal the transports. Tell them to run. Tell them Earth will be waiting. The comms officer's voice broke with emotion as she relayed the words. And in that moment, humanity's defiance was carved into the void. As the Defender limped back into the shadows, the Invarians regrouped. They had taken losses, yes, but more importantly, they had been challenged. Admiral Zexalon received the report with a slow, predatory calm. "A single ship," he murmured. His mandibles clicked in amusement. "A single ship dares to wound us. How quaint." But behind his amusement was something else, something the Invarians had not felt in centuries. Caution. The humans had drawn blood, and blood, once spilled, demanded war. The skies above Earth were quiet, too quiet for a world that had just received news of war. In the great chamber of the United Earth Security Council, every seat was filled. Leaders, admirals, strategists, all drawn together under the flickering glow of a single transmission. The image was distorted, static clawing at its edges, but the voice was unmistakable. "This is Commander Eric Wells of the USS Defender. We engaged the Invarian fleet above Arcturus 4. Casualties sustained. Enemy, vessels destroyed, civilians evacuated. Earth must prepare, they are coming." The transmission cut out, leaving silence heavy enough to crush the air. For a long moment no one spoke. The enormity of the words hung like thunderclouds over the chamber. Earth had been warned. On the streets of New Berlin, on the floating platforms, of Pacifica on the domed cities of Mars, people watched the same message on endless repeat. The Defender had stood against the invincible. The Defender had fought back. Hope rippled through the human worlds like wildfire. For centuries, humanity had grown, expanded, built wonders across the stars. But never had they faced something like the Invarians. Now, for the first time, they knew they were not untouchable. And yet, if one ship could resist, perhaps an entire fleet could endure. Recruitment centers overflowed. Factories doubled production. Children pointed at hollows of the Defender and whispered, "That's us. That's who we are." But hope was fragile, and far away the shadow was moving closer. In orbit around Earth, shipyards roared to life. Vast frames of unfinished warships floated in silence, their skeletal hulls bathed in floodlights. Crews swarmed over them, welding, bolting, fusing steel and plasma conduits together with desperate speed. The Admiralty had called it Project Iron Shield, a race against time to build a fleet strong enough to stand between Earth and extinction. Yet, the truth whispered in dark corridors was cruel. They didn't have enough time. The Invarians had conquered 50 worlds in less than a decade. Their fleets moved like storms, consuming everything in their path. And now Admiral Zexalon had turned his gaze directly toward Earth. The storm was already coming. On the Defender, drifting in repair orbit above Luna, The crew lived in uneasy silence. The ship bore the scars of Arcturus like open wounds. Hull, plating blackened, decks gutted, systems jury-rigged with wires that sparked when the lights dimmed. The Defender was alive, but barely. And yet, she was revered. Every shuttle that passed slowed to look at her. Every worker who glimpsed her battered frame whispered a quiet prayer. The Defender had become more than a ship. She was a symbol, a promise that humanity could fight back. Commander Wells watched from the observation deck, his reflection staring back at him from the stars. His body ached with exhaustion, his mind haunted by the screams from Arcturus, by the faces of the civilians they couldn't save. And still, his crew looked to him for strength. Captain Lisa Reeves of the scout ship Aurora visited him that night. She had seen the same battles, the same devastation. Her voice was quiet but steady. "They'll need you, Eric," she said. "More than ever. You lit the fire. Now you have to keep it burning." Wells didn't answer. He wasn't sure if he could. Meanwhile, far beyond Earth, in the cold silence of invariant space, Admiral Zexalon stood in the throne chamber of his flagship. The chamber walls pulsed faintly, alive with biometal veins that responded to his presence. The Invarian fleet stretched into infinity outside, a horizon of alien steel waiting for his command. He studied the holographic image of Earth, a green and blue world glowing with life, so fragile, so unaware. The humans had surprised him. Their defiance had cost him ships. That was intolerable. "The species is stubborn," hissed one of his lieutenants. "They resist." "Resistance," Zexalon replied, "is irrelevant. Resistance merely delays assimilation." His mandibles clicked in something almost like amusement. "But it will be satisfying to break them." He raised a clawed hand, and the order was given. The full force of the Invarian fleet began to move toward Earth. Back home, preparations reached fever pitch. War simulations filled the tactical academies. Pilots trained in virtual swarms, learning to strike and vanish, hit-and-run tactics, the only chance against superior firepower. Factories rolled out fighters, bombers, warships faster than ever before, though too many still lacked weapons. Too many were rushed into service unfinished, and through it all the people watched the Defender. Every scar on her hull was a reminder. Humanity could bleed the Invarians. Humanity could endure. But Wells knew the truth. The battle ahead would not be about survival alone. It would be about identity. Humanity had faced tyrants before, empires, wars, catastrophes that had nearly ended them. And every time they had risen stubborn and unyielding, this time would be no different. As he stood once more on the command deck of the Defender, Wells looked out at Earth, a blue jewel hanging in the abyss. His crew stood with him, silent, waiting for his words. "We stopped them once," he said. "We'll stop them again. This ship isn't just steel and firepower. It's us. It's every life we fight for, every soul that refuses to bow. They're coming here, to our home, and we will meet them." The crew's silence broke into thunderous affirmation. For the first time in centuries, Earth was united. For the first time, humanity stood as one. And in the depths of the galaxy, the shadow of the Invarian Empire grew larger with every passing moment. The void was restless. Sensors across the outer colonies screamed with alerts as the first shadows of the Invarian fleet broke into human space. Outposts on the rim, once sleepy stations orbiting barren moons, became the first to witness the storm. To the naked eye, the Invarian ships appeared as jagged leviathans, black silhouettes against the stars, each vessel a cathedral of alien steel and living metal. They did not glide. They consumed space itself, advancing with the inevitability of a tide that had drowned 50 worlds before. One transmission reached Earth from Outpost Zephyr before the static swallowed it whole. Contact confirmed. Hundreds. No, thousands of signatures, their silence. The outpost was gone. In the war rooms beneath Geneva, the Security Council watched the feed vanish into black. No one needed to speak. The invasion had begun. Admiral Hayes, the grizzled commander of Earth's defense, slammed his hand onto the table. Mobilize the fleet, all of it. Every hull that can fire, every pilot that can breathe. We hold them here, or we never hold them at all. The room erupted with motion. Officers relayed orders across star systems, activating squadrons from Mars to Titan. Entire academies of cadets were pushed into active duty overnight. The Iron Shield project was no longer a desperate preparation. It was war. Above Earth's sister worlds, the fleet began to form. Carriers older than a century rumbled from dry dock, their hulls patched and painted with new banners. Experimental frigates, their energy cores still unstable, were rushed into formation. Even civilian transports were stripped, armored, and given rail cannons to act as auxiliary fire support. But at the center of it all, like the heart of a storm, floated the USS Defender. Her hull still scarred, her deck still under repair, she stood ready. To every pilot, every soldier, every civilian watching the broadcast across the colonies, she was more than a ship. She was the line between survival and annihilation. Commander Eric Wells stood on her bridge, face lined with exhaustion but eyes hard as steel. Around him, his crew braced for what lay ahead. The Defender had bled once. She would bleed again. But she would not bow. And then, in the silent dark of the Arcturus corridor, the two forces met. The first human fleet engagement against the Invarians. They called it the Battle of Vega Reach. It began as a ripple of motion, sensor blips multiplying, into hundreds then thousands until the displays glowed red with enemy signatures. "Contact in 3 minutes," reported Lieutenant Navarro, her voice shaking. The crew braced. Hands tightened on consoles. Hearts pounded. And then the abyss. Erupted Anvarian warships surged into view, their hulls shifting with grotesque organic fluidity. Energy crackled across their spines, building into weapons humanity had no names for. The first volley tore into the human line like lightning through glass. Entire wings of fighters blinked out in bursts of fire. A carrier, the Everest, vanished. In a blossom of plasma, her wreckage scattering like embers across the void. But the humans did not break. "Return fire," Wells barked, and the void came alive with thunder. Rail cannons spat tungsten slugs the size of buses, tearing into the Invarian vanguard. Torpedoes streaked through the dark, slamming into alien hulls and exploding in blossoms of blue fire. For the first time in centuries, the Invarians bled. The Defender led the charge. Her engines roared as she plunged through the heart of the enemy. Formation, weapons blazing in every direction. She was smaller than the Leviathans she fought, outgunned 100 to 1, but she fought like a cornered beast. A swarm of Invarian interceptors descended on her, claws of energy raking across her. Shields. The Defender spun, her flak batteries igniting the void with a storm of fire. Dozens of alien craft vanished, shredded into molten shards. And still she pressed forward. At her side, Earth's fleet executed its desperate gambit. The Wolf Pack. Maneuver. Dozens of smaller frigates split into hunting packs, darting into the Invarian lines, striking from multiple angles before vanishing into asteroid fields and debris clouds. It was chaos. Chaos the Invarian hive mind struggled to process. For the first time in living memory, the Empire's perfect machine of conquest faltered. But the cost was unbearable. Every minute bought with bravery was paid in blood. Ships detonated in silent blossoms. Pilots screamed their last into the comms before static claimed them. The fleet was holding, but barely. On the Defender's bridge, alarms screamed. Shields dropped to 40%. Hull integrity fell with every impact. Wells gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "Keep firing," he ordered. "As long as we breathe, we fight." And then, amidst the chaos, something impossible happened. A Invarian dreadnought, vast kilometers long, a beast that had crushed civilizations, reeled under the combined assault of human fire. Its hull cracked, its spine shuddered, and with a final thunderous strike from the Defender's railguns, the dreadnought broke apart. The humans roared across the comms. Hope surged like wildfire. The unbreakable had been broken. But Wells did not cheer. His eyes remained locked on the tactical display where hundreds more enemy signatures closed in, wave after wave. Destroying one ship meant nothing to an empire of thousands. This was only the beginning. The battle raged for hours. A storm of fire and steel that painted the void with wreckage, and though humanity stood, though they had bloodied the Empire for the first time, the cost was staggering. 17 ships lost, tens of thousands dead, and the Invarian fleet still advancing. As the shattered remnants of Earth's fleet limped back toward the Sol system, Wells stood in silence on the Defender's bridge. His ship was broken, his crew was exhausted, his people were dying, and yet there was no defeat in his eyes, only resolve. "Transmit to command," he said quietly. "We delayed them, not enough, they're coming, prepare Earth." The war was no longer a warning, it was here. The Sol system had never felt so fragile. For centuries, Earth had believed herself the cradle of humanity, untouchable in her dominion. Armies and fleets were built, wars fought, borders redrawn, but all of it had been against humans. Never had the planet faced something so vast, so merciless, so intent on reducing her to ash. And now, the storm had come home. The surviving fleet limped back through the Kuiper Belt, broken hulls trailing smoke and debris. The Defender led them, her armor pocked with craters, her shields barely holding together but her engines still burning with defiance. When Earth's orbital stations caught sight of her return, millions across the globe watched the transmissions, with tears in their eyes. To see her, scarred, battered, yet unyielding, was to see humanity itself reflected back. But beyond the fragile hope, fear rippled like a second tide. For behind her, sensors tracked the oncoming darkness. The full, Invarian fleet still advancing with terrible precision. Admiral Hayes's voice echoed across every command channel. "All hands, all ships, this is the stand. The Invarians are at our doorstep. We fight or we cease to exist." The Sol defense net activated. From the icy plains of Europa, missile silos broke open like frozen tombs, hurling warheads into the void. Titans, gas-shrouded orbit filled with gun platforms, their cannons turning toward the stars. Mars released her fleet of interceptors, 1,000 fighters launching in a storm of contrails. And above Earth herself, the pride of the Iron Shield stood ready. Over 300 warships arrayed in concentric rings around the homeworld. Carriers, frigates, corvettes, all burning with the same purpose, to hold, no matter the cost. For the first time in human history, the entire species was united beneath one command. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath, and then the dark arrived. The first Invarian ships breached Neptune's orbit. Sensors howled as their massive signatures spread across the system, blotting out the clean lines of space with a swarm of leviathans. They did not roar, did not announce themselves. They simply came, like a tide of iron and shadow sweeping across the stars. The siege of Sol had begun. The opening strike fell upon Saturn's defense ring. Dozens of human frigates stationed among the rings fought valiantly, unleashing rail fire into the void. But the Invarians moved like predators. Their weapons pierced the frigates one by one, their organic hulls shifting to adapt mid-battle. Within minutes, the defense line around Saturn was reduced to wreckage. What had taken years to build fell in silence, swallowed by the black. But the humans had bought time for the main fleet to prepare. On the bridge of the Defender, Commander Eric Wells watched as tactical displays bloomed with enemy signatures closing in. His crew stood at their stations, pale but steady. Lieutenant Navarro whispered, "Sir, there are so many." Wells did not look away from the displays. His voice was calm, steel wrapped in fire. "Then we'll show them how many humans it takes to stop an empire." The fleets collided in the asteroid belt. Human ingenuity met alien perfection. Wolf packs of destroyers danced through the rocks, ambushing Invarian cruisers with plasma volleys before vanishing into the shadows. Carriers unleashed waves of fighters, darting like sparks through the void, striking engines, sensors, anything that could wound. The Defender herself drove into the heart of the battle, railguns spitting fire, her cannons thundering against a dreadnought's shields. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed possible. For the first time since the war began, Earth's defenders did not collapse in the first hour. They held, they fought, they bled, but the invariants were endless. Every ship destroyed was replaced by two more, every maneuver countered by an alien adaptation. And then came the Harbinger. It was a ship unlike any the humans had faced. Vast as a small moon, its surface writhed with living metal, its weapons bristling with energies unseen before. It moved into the center of the battlefield like a god descending into mortal war. Its first strike was not fire, but silence. A wave of energy rippled from its core, and every human ship caught in its radius went dead. Engines sputtered. Weapons shut down. Thousands of fighters drifted helplessly as their systems collapsed. Then the fire came. Beams of searing light cut through the disabled vessels, tearing them apart like toys. Entire squadrons vanished in seconds. The fleet reeled. Morale shattered. Even the Defender staggered under the weight of the blast, her shields flickering to near collapse. On Earth, billions watched in horror as live feeds showed their defenders being slaughtered. Entire families clung to one another, praying to gods who could not hear them. But in the chaos, Wells stood unshaken. "Bring us closer," he ordered. The bridge froze. "Closer, sir?" Navarro asked, disbelief in her voice. "Closer," he repeated, his voice iron. "That thing is their heart. If we can wound it, just wound it, maybe we buy Earth another day." The Defender roared forward, alone, plunging, straight toward the Harbinger. The clash was cataclysmic. Every gun aboard the Defender opened fire. Torpedoes streaked like burning arrows, slamming into the Harbinger's living hull. Rail cannons thundered in relentless rhythm, their slugs shattering. Layer after layer of alien armor. The Harbinger answered with fury. Beams of white fire carved through the void, striking the Defender again and again. The ship buckled, her hull tearing, alarms screaming across every deck, but she did not break. Through fire and ruin, she pressed forward. Through the static, Wells's voice carried across every comm in the fleet. "This is the Defender. We will not yield, not today, not ever." And as she rammed into range, the Defender unleashed her final weapon. The experimental pulse warhead, a weapon designed not to kill, but to cripple. The detonation tore through the Harbinger's systems. For the first time in the war, the great beast faltered. Its weapons flickered, its shields collapsed in sparks. The humans roared. Across the system, hope ignited. The Harbinger was not invincible. But as the Defender drifted from the blast, her hull shattered, her systems dying. Wells knew the truth. They had bought only a breath. The Harbinger still lived, and the siege of Sol was far from over. The night sky of Earth was no longer a place of wonder. For millennia, humankind had looked up at the stars with dreams of exploration, of infinite horizons, of discovery. But now the heavens burned with a different light. Streaks of fire fell across the black, each one a ship dying, each one a life extinguished. Where once the constellations had offered guidance, they now told only of destruction. The Invarian fleet had breached the last line of defense. The crippled Defender drifted in low orbit above Earth, her battered hull barely holding. Fires raged. Through her corridors, medbays overflowed with the wounded, and crew fought desperately just to keep her alive. Yet even wounded, she remained a beacon. Across the network, the Defender's symbol was broadcast again and again. The image of a ship that had dared to strike the Harbinger and survive. For billions watching from the surface, she was proof that humanity could fight gods and remain standing. But the storm was not paused. It was descending. From the lunar far side, the first wave of Invarian assault craft emerged. Black wings stretched across the void, descending upon the orbital platforms ringing Earth. Lasers scythed through satellites, particle beams tore through, defense grids and the night sky lit with fire. Orbital Command fought back with everything it had. Massive cannons on the orbital elevators spat thunder, space stations turned into fortresses, and Earth's carrier fleets launched every fighter in reserve. For the first time in recorded history, the war had come directly to the skies of Earth, and the world trembled. On the surface, cities turned dark as power grids shifted to military control. Anti-orbital cannons were raised from hidden silos in Siberia, the Sahara, the Rockies. Ancient places now bristling with weapons forged for this single hour. Families huddled in bunkers deep beneath the earth. Some prayed, some cursed, others simply waited. There was no escape now. If the line above failed, Earth itself would burn. In New York, London, Shanghai, Karachi, São Paulo, Johannesburg, millions crowded in the streets, watching the skies as battles raged overhead, streaks of light crossing like shattered auroras. Humanity had never been more united in terror. And then the Harbinger arrived. It slipped into orbit like a shadow blotting out the sun. Vast, terrible, alive with energy, it loomed above the planet like judgment itself, its surface still scarred from the Defender's strike, yet it radiated an aura of invincibility, as though mocking the tiny world below. At its arrival, silence fell. Every human soldier, every child, every refugee staring at the heavens knew they were looking at death incarnate. The Harbinger lowered its weapons and fired. A beam of impossible light struck from orbit, tearing through the clouds, boiling the seas, and igniting the atmosphere itself. In the Pacific, a storm of flame rose 100 kilometers high, vaporizing an entire fleet in an instant. On the ground, shockwaves rolled across continents. Windows shattered from California to Tokyo. Tides rose and fell in unnatural rhythms. The earth itself seemed to scream. This was not a battle. It was extermination. Yet amid the horror, humanity did not break. On the broken bridge of the Defender, Commander Wells dragged himself upright, blood streaming down his temple. His voice was hoarse, cracked, but still carrying command. "Get me comms, all channels." The surviving officer hesitated. "Sir, most systems are gone," then shouted into the void, Wells growled. "Let every human hear," and somehow they did. His voice echoed across the fleet, across the command networks, across Earth itself. "This is Commander Wells of the Defender. The Harbinger is here, and so are we. They will not take Earth while we still draw breath." It was not strategy. It was not a battle plan. It was defiance. And it lit a fire. Across orbit, crippled ships reignited their drives. Platforms that had fallen silent powered weapons for one last volley. Fighters running out of fuel rammed themselves into Invarian wings, detonating in flashes of desperate brilliance. The orbital line bent, cracked and bled, but it did not shatter. Humanity was still there, and then came the unthinkable. From the depths of the earth, in bunkers once thought myth, the Leviathan project was unleashed. Massive. Ships, unfinished, experimental, too dangerous to ever have been deployed, rose from hidden silos beneath the oceans. Their launch shattered waves, boiling entire coastlines as they clawed skyward, ancient engines roaring. Leviathans, behemoths of war, each the size of a city, built in secret as Earth's final contingency. And they rose now, toward the Harbinger. World erupted in cheers as feeds broadcast their ascent. For the first time in the siege, humanity struck back not with desperation but with fury. The Harbinger turned, sensing the threat. Its weapons pulsed, tearing into the first Leviathan's hull, but the beast did not fall. It drove forward, its own cannons blazing, striking the Harbinger with thunder that shook the skies. Above Earth, gods and monsters collided, and the fate of humanity teetered on the edge of the abyss. The oceans boiled. From the deep trenches of the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian seas, the Leviathans tore free of their slumber. Titans of steel and plasma, forged in silence across decades of paranoia, now revealed themselves to the sky. Each was a fortress in its own right, bristling with cannons the size of towers, missile silos that could level continents, and shields once thought impossible to generate on such scale. Yet the Leviathans were not perfect. They were prototypes, half completed, rushed from their cradles because Earth had no choice. But they were humanity's last answer to the Harbinger. The first clash came in the upper atmosphere, where the Leviathan Prometheus rose like a mountain of fire. Its plasma lances erupted in a storm, cutting through the Invarian escorts that swarmed around the Harbinger like carrion birds. Dozens fell in arcs of flame, spiraling into the ocean below. The Harbinger answered. One single volley from its central, cannon-gutted Prometheus, tearing a gash the size of a city across its hull. Fires spilled into the vacuum, escape pods launched in streams, but the behemoth did not fall. Instead, it hurled itself forward, colliding with an Invarian dreadnought and detonating its fusion core. The sky split with light. On the surface, the people of Earth saw the heavens burn as if the stars themselves were at war. From deserts and tundras, from cities and villages, every eye was turned upward. Each eruption was felt like a heartbeat, each flash a prayer answered or silenced. Families huddled together in bunkers as the walls trembled. Children clutched radios that carried broken transmissions from the battlefield. Across cultures, across languages, there was only one shared plea: hold. In orbit, the Defender limped beside the Leviathan Aegis, her hull scorched, but her spirit unbroken. Commander Wells stood at his shattered command deck, every nerve screaming with pain, yet his eyes fixed only on the Harbinger. He could feel its presence now, not just as a ship, but as something more, a shadow in the mind, a will pressing against his own. Every crewman who locked eyes with its silhouette reported the same sensation: despair, as though the void itself whispered that resistance was meaningless. But Wells had lived through despair before, and he knew its secret. Despair was only powerful if you listened. Signal the Leviathans, he ordered. His voice was ragged but resolute. Form the net. Don't let it break through. And so the giants moved. The Leviathans encircled the Harbinger, their bulk forming a noose of steel. Missiles streaked across the void. Rail cannons fired in thunderous unison, and laser beams lanced into the beast's shields, overloading them with a storm of energy. For a moment, just a moment, the Harbinger staggered. Its defenses flickered, its aura dimmed, and the human fleet roared in triumph. But triumph is fragile. The Harbinger pulsed. A wave of energy rippled outward, invisible, but devastating. Every system it touched died. Fighters fell from the sky like ash. Defense satellites went silent. Even the Leviathans shuddered, their reactors flickering as though the heartbeat of the machines themselves faltered. This was no ordinary weapon. This was domination made manifest. On the surface, communications went black. Entire nations screamed into silence. For 30 endless seconds, Earth believed the war was lost, and then, light, the Leviathan Atlas reignited. Against all odds, its engines roared, defying the Harbinger's suffocating will. It drove forward, shields collapsing, hull tearing, but weapons blazing with the fury of a world that refused to kneel. Its captain, voice breaking across the comms, uttered only one sentence before Atlas rammed itself into the Harbinger's flank. Tell them Earth did not bow. The explosion shook orbit. Fragments of Invarian steel rained into the atmosphere, burning like meteors. For the first time since its arrival, the Harbinger recoiled. It bled. Cheers erupted across the surviving fleet, across the bunkers below, across every human soul clinging to hope. The impossible had happened. But hope carries its own cost. In its rage, the Harbinger turned its entire fury toward Earth. Its weapons shifted downward, glowing with the intensity of a sun, preparing a strike not against ships, but against the planet itself. The target was clear, not military, not strategic. Civilians, billions of them. The Harbinger meant to end not just the war, but the idea of humanity itself. On the Defender, alarms screamed. Wells gripped the rail, staring at the monstrous weapon powering before them. His crew looked to him, waiting for orders, waiting for salvation, but he had none left to give. In that silence, In that final breath, Wells made his choice. Prepare. The jump drive, he whispered. The officer beside him flinched. Sir, the core's unstable. It'll tear us apart. I know, Wells said, his voice calm now. But if we ram her, if we take the Harbinger into the void with us, Earth gets to live. The crew stared. For a heartbeat, no one spoke, and then, one by one, they nodded. Not in obedience. In agreement. They would go with him. The Defender turned, engines flaring one final time, her broken body dragging itself toward the Harbinger like a knight lifting its sword after the world had already declared him dead. On the surface, millions watched in silence as the ship that had become their symbol aimed itself into the mouth of the beast, and the sky shook with destiny. The Defender had always been more than steel, more than circuitry, more than the sum of her weapons and engines. She had been forged in defiance, baptized in fire, and tempered by sacrifice. Every battle she had survived had carved her into a symbol, not just of war, but of humanity's refusal to kneel. Now, battered and bleeding, she was asked for her final act, and she answered. Commander Eric Wells stood at the ruined heart of the bridge, his uniform scorched, his hands trembling, as sparks rained from shattered consoles. The Harbinger filled the viewport, a wound in the stars, its superweapon building toward a brightness so intense it seemed the heavens themselves would rupture. Status, he demanded, voice low but unshaken. Jump core at 48%, called Lieutenant Herrera, her face streaked with blood. Stabilizers are gone, sir. If we ignite, we're not coming back. Wells closed his eyes briefly. He had known the answer before asking. Plot the course, he said. There was no hesitation in the crew. Not anymore. They had followed him through storms of fire, into the teeth of an empire that had swallowed galaxies. And if this was where it ended, then they would end together. Across the fleet, battered human warships and dying leviathans held the line as the Defender moved. They knew what she was doing. They knew what it meant. One by one, their comm channels lit up with voices, some steady, some breaking, but all speaking the same words. Defender, you are not alone. The chorus grew, from cruisers with shattered hulls, from fighter pilots with minutes of oxygen left, from Leviathan captains bleeding at their command chairs. Defender, you are not alone. Wells swallowed hard as the transmissions poured in. His vision blurred, but not from the wounds. For the first time since this war began, he felt not the weight of command, but the embrace of unity. Humanity was with him. The Harbinger's weapon neared ignition. The sky warped around it, light bending as the cannon reached its crescendo. Down on Earth, entire continents held their breath, aware they had only moments before annihilation. And then, through the haze of fire and fear, the Defender surged forward. Her engines screamed, belching trails of white-blue flame. Her hull cracked, shedding layers of armor into the void. Her shields flickered like a dying heartbeat. But still she moved, unwavering, unstoppable. A single ship against a god. Inside, the jump core began to tear itself apart. Warning klaxons, blared consoles burst into flames, but the crew held their stations. Wells gripped the railing, every muscle locked against the vibration of a ship on the edge of disintegration. Distance to target? He barked. 2,000 kilometers. The Harbinger loomed like a mountain of death, filling the stars with its impossible mass. Core overload in 40 seconds. The crew worked in silence, each face etched with grim resolve. Ensign Carter slid a photograph of his family into the corner of his console. Chief Engineer Daniels whispered a prayer to no god in particular. Dr. Ross strapped herself into her chair, hands trembling but eyes steady. They were ready. Wells turned one last time, looking over them all. I couldn't have asked for a braver crew, he said, his voice breaking. You are the best of us, and history will remember you. History will remember us, Ross corrected, tears running down her soot-streaked cheeks. The Harbinger's weapon fired. A beam of annihilation screamed toward Earth, brighter than a sun, hot enough to melt oceans, strong enough to shatter continents. But it never struck, because the Defender struck first. She slammed into the Harbinger's heart at the exact moment the jump core collapsed inward. Space itself screamed as the singularity unfolded, dragging steel, fire, and fury into an implosion beyond comprehension. The Harbinger's light twisted, fractured, and then was consumed. Its weapon died in silence, its hull crumpled like paper, before being swallowed into the collapsing void. For a heartbeat, all was gone. And then came the blast. A shockwave ripped through orbit, hurling wreckage in all directions. Ships, human and Invarian alike, were cast adrift as the stars themselves seemed to buckle. The Leviathans reeled, their armor peeling away under the force. But the Harbinger was no more. Where once it had stood, there was only a wound in the heavens, a rift of darkness, glowing faintly with the ashes of a god, and the Defender was gone. On Earth, people emerged from bunkers in stunned silence. They looked to the sky, to the place where doom had been certain, and they saw it was not there. Instead, they saw fragments of light drifting like fireflies, the last remnants of a ship that had given everything. Cheers broke out, wild and unrestrained. Strangers embraced. Children wept into their mothers' arms. Entire cities erupted into cries of joy that shook the ruins of the world. But in every cheer, there was grief, because the Defender was no more, and the heroes who had guided her had gone into legend. The war was not yet won. The Invarian fleet still lingered, battered but vast. But they had lost their god, and humanity had proven what no other race had dared, that the Empire could bleed. Earth was no longer prey. Earth was a predator now, and in the void where the light of the Defender's sacrifice still shimmered, a new war was beginning. Silence. For the first time in weeks, the skies above Earth were silent. The black void that had groaned under the weight of war now lay still, broken only by drifting wreckage. The Harbinger was gone, and with it, the Defender. In orbit, the surviving fleet limped among the debris. Hulls torn open, engines sputtering, crews working with shaking hands to keep their ships alive. The Leviathans that remained had fallen back into disarray, their movement sluggish, their formation broken. Without the Harbinger's hive command to anchor them, their once perfect coordination dissolved into chaos. But no one celebrated. Not yet. The price was too raw. On Earth, across shattered cities and smoldering ruins, the news spread like a storm. The Harbinger destroyed, the weapon of gods undone, humanity saved, and the Defender lost. People emerged from shelters with tears in their eyes. Some wept openly, sobbing in streets littered with ash and glass. Others fell to their knees, whispering thanks to a ship they had never seen, but which had given them everything. In New York, a boy clutched a makeshift toy starship in his hands and whispered, "She saved us." In Mumbai, a mother knelt in prayer, tears streaking her face as she said the names of strangers she would never know. In Paris, London, Rio, Johannesburg, Tokyo, fires still burned, smoke still hung heavy. But the people looked upward with something the Invarians had never meant them to feel again: hope. The Earth Security Council convened within hours. Their chamber, cracked from bombardment, was lit only by backup generators. Dust still drifted from the ceiling, but the leaders of humanity sat, grim-faced, surrounded by the ghost of victory. Admiral Yates stood before them, his voice ragged. "The Defender has fallen," he said. "But she has bought us time, and time, counselors, is everything. We must not waste what they gave us." Around the table, heads bowed. There was no dissent, no politics, no hesitation. Every nation, every faction, every fragment of humanity knew the truth. Earth would never survive another wave unprepared. The war was not over. It had only begun. In orbit, rescue operations swept across the wreckage fields. Shuttles darted among twisted metal, pulling survivors from broken hulks. From the Leviathans, too, came voices of surrender. Some of the great beasts drifted lifeless, their crews dead or fled. Others, damaged, cut adrift from their command, sent weak transmissions, asking not for mercy, but for purpose. For the first time, they were not bound by the harbinger's will. They were free and they were lost. Some humans wanted vengeance, to slaughter the survivors, to send a message of blood, but others saw something different, a chance. In a medical bay aboard the cruiser Valiant, Dr. Judy Ross, one of the few who had escaped the Defender, moved among the wounded. Her hands worked mechanically, sealing burns, stabilizing fractures, but her eyes burned with grief. Everywhere she turned, she saw her crew. Faces that should have been there, voices she would never hear again. The silence of her ship haunted her. At one point she stopped, pressing her palms against the cold steel wall. Her shoulders shook, her voice a broken whisper. "Eric, we did it. But I don't know if I can carry this." Yet she did. Because that was the oath she had made, the oath the Defender had carried into the fire. Humanity buried its dead in fire and silence. Mass funerals were held across the globe, broadcast across fractured networks. The names of the Defender's crew were read aloud, each syllable echoing, through cities, through homes, through hearts. When the list ended, there was no applause, only silence. A silence so profound it felt like the universe itself bowed in respect. But even in mourning, the world stirred. Factories burned through the night, turning out warships and weapons. Recruits filled training halls, their eyes hardened by loss. The people had tasted survival, and they would not give it up. The Defender had not died for a desperate people. She had died for a nation reborn. Yet in the cold dark, the enemy remained. The Invarian fleet, though broken, had not fled. Scouts reported movements, erratic, scattered, but dangerous. The Empire would not forget this humiliation. The Harbinger might be gone, but the shadow of its return hung heavy. Whispers spread among commanders. This was not the end. This was only the opening strike, and so Earth prepared. They fortified the orbital defenses. They mined the asteroid belts. They poured everything into new weapons, new ships, new alliances. Every resource, every ounce of will, bent toward the singular purpose of survival. But beneath the steel, beneath the fury, there was a deeper change. Humanity had seen the abyss, and instead of breaking, it had risen. They were no longer prey. They were no longer children of a fragile world, hiding under the shelter of stars. They were warriors, survivors, a people who had destroyed a god. And if the Invarian Empire came again, humanity would be ready. The galaxy remembered silence. For 3 centuries, the Invarian Empire had been that silence, a vast shadow rolling from star to star, consuming all in its path, leaving behind broken husks of civilizations too weak to resist. To many, resistance had seemed impossible, a dream whispered only in the ruins of conquered worlds. But then came one ship, the Defender. Word spread faster than light. Traders, refugees, scattered colonies, all carried the tale of a single human vessel that had stood against the Harbinger, the living godship of the Invarians. Of fire that had swallowed it, yes, but fire that had also consumed the unstoppable. From the outer rim to the coreward systems, the story spread. On planets still, bound in chains, whispers became chants. In hidden cells of rebels long beaten into dust, hope stirred like embers fanned into flame. The galaxy was no longer silent. On Earth, the rebuilding began. Cities scarred by bombardment rose again, their shattered towers rebuilt stronger, taller. Space yards glowed with construction, their arms stretching to the void, birthing new fleets that bore the name of the fallen. The Defender class was born, sleeker, stronger, deadlier than any ship before it. Yet everyone carried the same crest etched into its hull. To the lost, to the brave, to the first who stood. Children in schools learned not only of humanity's wars of the past, but of the day their people defied extinction. The day they proved that survival was not enough, that they could fight and they could win. And across the world, in homes and halls, a name was spoken like a prayer. Commander Eric Wells, not as a man, not as a soldier, but as a symbol. The one who chose to stand when orders said to kneel. The one who led the defender into the fire so that a world could wake to dawn. But the galaxy is not so easily changed. The Invarian fleet did not vanish. Fractured, yes. Broken, yes. But not gone. In their dark halls, surviving warlords argued and schemed. Without the Harbinger, their unity faltered, yet their hunger burned on. Some vowed vengeance, some sought to rebuild the godship in secret, and some, stripped of command, drifting without purpose, looked to the humans not as enemies but as something far more dangerous, as leaders. In the shadows, emissaries came. Alien voices, tentative, cautious, reaching out across the void. Refugees of the Invarian yoke. Survivors of worlds long enslaved. They came with stories of suffering, but also with questions. How did you break them? How did you endure? Will you lead us too? For the first time in living memory, the galaxy looked not to the Invarians, but to Earth. On a quiet night aboard the new Earth flagship Vigilant, Dr. Judy Ross stood alone at the viewing glass. Stars sprawled before her, endless and cold. But tonight they felt different. Behind her, the hum of engines whispered of fleets preparing to sail into the dark. Ahead, the stars glittered not as unreachable points, but as destinations waiting. She touched the glass, her reflection faint and hollow. For a moment, she saw the crew of the Defender behind her. Eric at the helm, Ramirez at weapons, Nguyen at navigation, the laughter, the arguments, the fierce determination, all gone, and yet not gone, because the galaxy now spoke their names. The galaxy carried their fire. Judy closed her eyes. A single tear traced her cheek, and she whispered the only words she had left. Rest well, we'll carry it from here. The dawn was not gentle. It was written in fire. But it was a dawn all the same. Humanity had risen from the ashes of its own near extinction. And now, with the galaxy watching, it would rise higher still. The Defender was gone. But the war she began was only just beginning.